Hello everybody and welcome to another Unity tutorial. Today I want to go over, I've gotten a lot of requests for how to create the particle effects that I used in my previous video where I showed off how to create your own Unity effects object that lets you spawn in a death effect once an enemy dies. And today I want to go over how to use the particle systems in Unity a little bit so you can make something similar to this, which this is the same scene from the last tutorial, which I'll be linking down below, so you guys can go to that if you want to. I won't be making this exact effect, but I'll go over how you can use the particle system to do something similar to that. Alright, so first things first, I recommend that you create a folder in your assets folder over here, like the one I have down here, the sprites folder, and then you just import some basic shapes from any editing program you choose, any images you want here. Really, you don't need to get these specific shapes, but these are the ones I'm going to be using in the video to create some of the effects. And you just pop down here to the assets folder, create a new folder, name it whatever you want, sprites, something like that, and then put all your shapes in there. This is just going to help later on when we use them in the video. To start creating your first effect, we're going to go over here to the hierarchy and we're going to right click, and then you get all your menus pop up over here, and you go over to effects and you have your particle system in there. The particle system is what we're going to be using throughout the video to make everything. It's what I've been using to create my effects. I won't be going over trails or anything else here. I haven't really used the system force fields or the line. I usually just use the trails and the particle system. So we're going to select that, and it will create a particle system for us over here, which right now is kind of hard to see with the way I've got it positioned in my scene here. So I'm just going to go off to where it is. I'm going to bring it up. It doesn't really matter where you have this particle system while you're working on it. But I'm going to leave mine over here and do that. So you're going to want to stop it because Unity just plays it by default when you create it. I'm going to rename this to Effect 1. You can name it to whatever you want. This is going to be either the effect you're going to have when a bullet hits something, when your enemy dies, and I'll just be going over each different module over here. So what you'll want to do for this master object, you're going to want to toggle off everything in here, and this is just going to hold all your other particle systems so that when you hit play on this, it'll play through all of them. And then here, this doesn't affect it too much except for the loop. You probably want to toggle off looping if this is something you're just going to want to play once. And I'm going to leave the duration to let's say 2 for this one. Everything else I'm going to leave on here. One thing you do need to watch out for is play on awake. This is something I'm going to leave on because the way I used it in my previous video is that I just spawned in the object into the game world and then it played it right away. So I'm going to want mine to play on awake. And that's how I'm going to be tackling this video. I'm going to assume that we just have play on awake on. And if you want to know how to actually use these effects in your game, you can go over to my other video that I made and I'll link that down below. Alright, so since we're going to be wanting to see what our effect looks like while we're working on it, for now on this effect object we just created, I'm going to leave looping on so that I can just hit play and edit the effect while I can see it here as well. So now that we've got that set up over here and we've toggled everything off, checked off all the little boxes, we're going to right click on the effect in the hierarchy and we're going to create a new one under it. Make sure that it's under that effect so that it plays when you hit play on it. You can rename this to whatever you want, whatever kind of effect or part of your effect this is. I'm going to be creating some sparks over here, so I'm going to name it that, and I'm going to set the duration to 2, and I'll leave looping on because that's what we want on so we can see it play over here. So if I hit play, you can see that it keeps playing the default effect over and over. And we're going to edit this a little bit so that we can make something out of it. So Um, I'm gonna actually jump down and I'm gonna start this whole this whole effect with the texture sheet animation section. So if I toggle that on, what you can do in here is we can change this mode to sprites, and this is how you could animate it, like animate your particles themselves so that they scroll through different sprites. I've never done that. What I use it for is so that I can go down here and select a sprite I have, like a circle, and change what the particles look like in inside the world. This is a lot more useful when you're working on a 2D game. That's what I've been using. If you want this to be a 3D shape, you can toggle that off and you can go down to the render module here. And then under render mode in Billboard, you can set it to mesh. And then you have to put in whatever mesh you want to use here, like a sphere, cube, capsule, or import your own 3D model. And then you will want to change the material as well to something that will work with it, like a material you created. So if I select the cube material here, it's going to be red just like the cube. Alright, so since we're going to be creating some sparks here, I'm going to have these be 2D because I don't really see the point of having them be 3D if it's an effect like that. So I'm going to set these to Billboard for now, and I'm going to change the material back to sprites default. I think it was set to default line originally. I just set it to sprite default if you're using a 2D sprite for this. And then I'll go to my texture sheet animation module, and I'm going to keep, I think I'm going to keep the circle on for this one. That should work well. And then right off the bat, something we can do to make these look a little bit better is to go under render mode on the render module here, and we can select stretched billboard. Now this is going to stretch the particles based on how they're moving and the speed that they're moving at. You can change all these different, play around with these little values over here and get a different effect. I'm going to leave them alone for now because this should work for what we're going to be doing. So you don't really need to worry about this module right now. I'm not going to be going over that in depth right now. But if we go up to sparks, there's a couple things we can do. First, we can set the start speed to whatever we want here. But since I want this to be a little bit more random, I'm going to set it to random between two constants on the side here. And then I'll choose a speed, say from 1 to 10. And now you can see that some of the particles are moving really quick while others are moving really slow. And you can play around with all these values and try to get the effect you want. And then under lifetime, I'll also set it random between 1 and 2 because the duration is 2 here. So I usually try to keep the highest lifetime value matched up with the duration up here. And then I'll keep a lifetime from 0.5 to 2, and it'll pick random values between those two. And then start size, I like to randomize for something like this too, because I don't want it to be super uniform. It will look more natural if it's not. And I'll go, say, from 0.2 to 0.5. Maybe I can lower this even more. Something like that. Now, yeah, right now it doesn't really look like anything that we want it to because it's just emitting up and they just disappear from the world. So to work on that a little bit, we're going to have to go down to first our shape module is one I like to work with a lot as well because it's kind of important to get the effect you want. Right now it's set to a cone. You can see it in the world over here. To get the sparks that we want, you can set it to a sphere, and you can see it emits from this point in the middle out in a random direction. You're going to be using sphere and circle a lot, I would say. Circle for 2D, it's the equivalent of using sphere for 2D. Although you can use 3D shapes in a 2D particle system whenever you're making a 2D game, which can give it a little bit more depth. Now, to get it to emit them in bursts, because right now they're just emitting over time, we're going to want to go over to our emission module, and we're going to want to change the rate over time to 0. So now it's not emitting anything at all, but then in this bursts list over here, we can add a new burst, and you can see already that it's starting to get where we want it to, and it's just spitting them out like that. So in here you can change the amount of particles that you want. You can set this to a random amount to, say, from 30 to 60, and it will pick a random number every time. You can change the cycles and intervals and everything, but you don't really need to for this. We only want it to play once throughout our whole animation here. So in shape, I'm going to change the radius to be a little bit smaller so that they're emitting from a smaller point. And I'm actually going to go up here and I'm going to change the size to be a bit smaller. Again, you don't have to copy this straight from what I'm doing. This is so you can get an idea of how to use the particle system to create your own stuff. So then now that we've kind of started getting the effect we want under the main module over here, since these are sparks and we want them to get to be affected by gravity, we can set the gravity modifier to 1, and I'm actually going to leave it at a lower value so it looks a little bit nicer. Sometimes you want to modify how gravity affects these particles. You can even set it to a negative gravity if you want, and they'll go up. But I'm going to set it to 0.5, and then I'm going to also change the color here so you can see it a little bit better. I'll set it to an orange. And if you want this to vary in color randomly between two values, you can do that too. You just go between two colors over here, and you can set it so that it will select a color that's between these two, and it'll look something like that. So already it's starting to get somewhere. It's starting to look a little bit nicer. Now, we don't want our particles to just disappear off into the game world instantly like that. We want them to slowly either diminish in size during their lifetime or to drop the alpha value on them. So that's why we have these handy modules over here. I'm going to use size over lifetime for this one. And now in here, once you toggle it on, you can go to this curve over here and you can select it, and then there's this little particle system curves menu down here. You can bring it up and you can see it shows you a bunch of different curves that you can select from, and you can see right now we have a linear curve over here, and they're actually increasing in size, and they start from 0 and go to 1. For this, we'd probably want a curve like this that decreases from that to 0, and this will be different based on the lifetime of the particles here, since we have them going from 0.5 to 2. So they'll always reach 0 at the end of their lifetime, and that's looking nice so far. It looks good. So here you can play around with this. You can add different points to make something crazy if you want to for your game. But I'm just going to leave it the default curve here. This one would also work. They would just drop a lot quicker in size. But this curve looks nice. If we wanted to do the same thing with color, you can go to color over lifetime, and you can click it here. And now what you can do if you want your alpha to drop is these bottom little ticks here. These control the color, the actual color, and then these up here just control the alpha. So if I did this, they would start at 0 alpha and they would start appearing. So you'd want to click on this one, select it, and you can drop it. You can also add more in here and make something different there, but this makes them diminish in alpha over time, which could work for a lot of different particle systems. In this case, I am not going to be using it, but that's how you can do that. And let's say you wanted to add some noise as well. This is a really handy module that helps you to give it kind of like a windy type effect. You can see it already doing something to them right there. You can up the strength and you can up the frequency. And what you really want to use here that's not automatically toggled on is the scroll speed. This will scroll through a bunch of different values over here to kind of randomize the movement of the particles a little bit better. And this can look really nice for like some sort of upgrade effect or something mystical almost. You can create some magic effects doing this. But for this, I'm not going to be using it since these are just sparks. Now, You can just really play around with these values and get the effect that you're looking for. Right now, what I think I'm missing with this one is I want the sparks to collide with the ground, since right now they just kind of go through it. So what I can do here is I can go over to collision and toggle that on. And then in here, now what I suggest you do is if you're going to get any performance issues in your game, you can set this to planes and then select the plane that they're supposed to collide with here. That way it will limit the amount of things that that Unity has to go through to make sure that it's colliding with things. I would just set it to world for now. That just makes it collide with anything that's got a collider on it, unless you add a mask here for it and select what you want it to collide with based on layers. You can change the bounciness here and make it bounce a little bit less. You can play around with damping the force when it hits the ground. I haven't really used too many of these values. Again, this is just something you can mess around with, get the effect you want. The radius is the actual radius of the particles when they hit the ground. It's really hard to tell with the ones I have right now because they're 2D sprites, but you get the idea there. That's looking alright. I'm going to go for a little bit less of a bounce here. Yeah, so you can do that. This is a really handy module to get things to collide with each other. Now, this is looking great, but let's say you want to add some sort of explosion or some impact effect in the middle here. You go over to your effect object over here, and you can right-click on it and create a new particle system. You can always duplicate this one and work from that one, but you can create a new one here. So what I would do is if I want to create an orb in the middle or like some sort of explosion flash, I'm going to start by setting all this stuff to what the other one is, and I'm going to just name it orb. Now if I go to shape, I can set it to sphere. I can lower the radius so it always spawns in the very center. And emission, we want to toggle this off, and we want it in a burst, and then we'll set that to 1. So now you can see it's only emitting one particle every time, but it's got a speed applied to it, so we're going to set that to 0. So now it's just emitting in the center. We can up the size to, let's say, 5. That might be a bit too big. Let's go 3. We can go to our texture sheet animation, and we can toggle it to see to use sprites, and then use a circle. And you can see we've got a circle in the middle there. Now you could do this with a 2D sprite like this, or you could do it with the mesh. In this case, since it's a 3D game, you probably want to go down to render over here and use mesh, and then select a sphere. Now we're getting a sphere spawning in the center there, and then we want to get an actual material for it. So let's just use the cube material for now, the material I created for the enemy. So we're getting a sphere, but it's not changing size or anything like that right now. So we can go to our size over lifetime, and we can set it to start at max and go down. And then we need to make sure that we change our lifetime here to match our duration. This is where you can screw up and leave it longer, and you won't get the effect you want. So watch out for that. But since this is like an explosion effect under our size over lifetime, we probably want to get this to drop quicker so that it's more of like an instant effect type thing. And if you want to, you could even take this curve and bring it over so that it gets to 0 a lot quicker. I'm probably going to do that, and I'm going to play around with these anchors over here so that we get something looking like that. That's starting to look nicer. Now, it's not disappearing when the effect is over. That's probably because it's not exactly at 0 here. There we go. So that's how you can create something like that. You could also, if you wanted to, you can go over here. Let me stop these really quick. I'm going to duplicate this. So let's say we were doing an orb that has like a fade to it instead of shrinking in size. I'm going to do this one with a sprite just so I can do one like that too, so you guys can see how that works. Set that to billboard, set the material to sprites default, and now you can go over here and you can disable the other one so we can just see this one. And I'm going to set the color to like a yellowish color here. Now to get that to fade, we just use we don't want the size to change here. We can go to our color over lifetime and we can lower this and then probably bring it up so that it fades a lot quicker. And if you wanted to, you could include the size over lifetime and do something like this where it just kind of starts off small and it goes off to the sides here. I'm going to turn off the selection outline from Gizmo so we can see that a little bit better there. And you could add more of these and overlay them. There is such thing as a subparticle system, so it'd be a particle system under each particle of a particle system. I don't use those. I haven't gotten into using those. I haven't had to for my games. This is how I've been creating my effects, and really it's more like the more you use it and mess around with it, the more you'll be able to create different things. I looked at some tutorials on basics on how to use the different modules, and then I just played around from there to create what I'm making over here. Like if I wanted to, on the sparks effect, I can go to limit velocity over time and then play around with the dampen value here to get those to stop and drop so that they don't go too fast. And you can get some cool stuff looking like that. You can double up on this orb fade and do an orb ring and go down here into the render and change, or not into the render, but into the texture sheet animation and change this into like a ring effect. Get something looking like that. It's really, the more you use it and mess around with it, you can create some cool stuff. So if I do this and I change the color and kind of add a little bit more to it there, and then I'll enable the orb and restart. You're going to have to restart this if you disable or enable them while you're working on it to get them to show up. And then we'll go to something like that. And you can change this to a cube or a cylinder or whatever you want. I'll leave it as a sphere, and then if I change the material to something that looks a little bit better here, just a default material. Yeah, this you would probably want to apply your own material to, like an emissive material, to give it that kind of explosion look. But once you're done creating your effect, again, you can just layer as many of these as you want. And when you have completed everything, you have everything that you want there. Let's say this is our particle, like our particle effect we want. You're going to want to make sure you select all of them, including the first one, and toggle off looping so that they don't loop anymore. So now when you play, you'll see that it'll stop playing them once they've played all the way through. Then now that you have your particle system, you would want to make a prefabs folder. So wherever you have your enemies and everything, I have my demo effect here from the last video. You're going to take this particle effect and you're going to drag it into a folder down here so that now it's a prefab and you can throw it onto any object in the game that you want. So I'm going to go to my enemy over here. Again, this is a script that you can see in my other video, how to create. These are both things I showed off. This enemy script I didn't really explain. I didn't not explain it, but I didn't show you how to make it. All it's doing is checking for a collision with the sphere, and then it's instantiating the object right here. So really, it's wherever you put this line in your code right here, wherever you use the instantiate method, you pass in the particle you're instantiating, the position, and the rotation. And so all we have to do here is take this effect and put it into where my death particles are there. Now when we hit play, I have mine in the scene there still, so it's going to play. But when this cube gets hit, you'll see it will instantiate that effect instead. So now we can get rid of this here because we have a prefab. So we still have it stored. And now whenever our cube gets hit, that's what it's going to spawn in. Now, you can get really crazy with this, and you can add in all sorts of different things for it. You can play around with start rotation. You can have a rotation over time as well, so that your particles rotate kind of like I did with my demo effect here. I can load that up. I had a bunch of different cubes spawn, different mesh particles spawn, rotated differently, and it kind of just gave this cool effect that the cube fell apart, and I had a bunch of spheres start with a big size and then just shrink out of existence. So that is how I've created these effects. And if you want to have this work like my other one, you just put on your effects object script on there, and then for the time you always want to put in the duration of your longest effect here. This effect object, I'll link the video to down below so you can learn how to make that. You add a camera shake, and then play around with the duration and stuff for this. And I didn't apply that. So whenever you edit your prefab, you want to make sure that you apply it here. Really what you want to be doing when you edit your effect is you want to load it up from down here and add that stuff in here, because then it'll automatically apply. You won't have to do that. So if I hit play in the game now, then when the cube gets hit, we have a camera shake and we have our effect. That is how you can create a basic particle effect, enemy death effect, whatever you really need it for in your game. You can instantiate these when something gets hit with an object, when things come into contact, when things explode. I didn't get too in depth with it here because if I really were to go into every little detail on how to use these, I would be here for a very long time, and this video is already pretty long, so I don't want to carry it on any longer. Leave any feedback you have down below in the comments, and let me know if there's anything I missed that I can help you out with. Again, I haven't made any tutorials really. I've only made one, so I don't really know if this is going to be the best quality or not, but I hope that it was able to help some of you that were asking me how to create an effect for your enemy, because I never went over that in my previous video, but I'll link that down below as well. Let me know if this helped or not. Make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you haven't yet. I'll be back with another tutorial in the future, hopefully. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching.